The story begins long before the modern age of convenience, back when the relationship between people and food was as close and intimate as the earth beneath their feet. Before America forgot where food comes from, it was impossible to overlook the fields that fed the nation. The land itself was a character, living and breathing through the seasons. In this narrative, the journey is seen through the eyes of Earl Mitchell, a man who has spent nearly 7 decades cultivating the same acreage in Iowa. He inherited this land from his father, and every inch of it holds memories of toil and triumph. Earl's childhood was defined by the smell of freshly turned soil, the rumble of a tractor engine, and the soft whistling of wind through rows of corn. During those early years, he watched his father work from dawn till dusk, using skills passed down through generations to coax life from the earth. Food was not something that simply appeared on a grocery shelf. It was the result of long hours, weathered hands, and unwavering faith. Earl often thought about how, in those days, the entire community was tethered to the land. Neighbors knew each other not just by name, but by the crops they planted and the livestock they raised. Potluck dinners were feasts celebrating the harvest, and everyone contributed dishes made from ingredients they had grown themselves. Children learned early that their meals depended on the success of their planting and the mercy of the weather. There was a deep respect for the cycle of planting and harvesting. Rain meant relief and growth. Drought meant hardship and prayer. The values of perseverance, integrity, and hard work were woven into daily life. It was not uncommon for farmers to help each other with tasks like baling hay or repairing machinery. To stand in the fields with a sense of pride and ownership was to understand that feeding a nation required resilience. In those earlier decades, farming was demanding but straightforward. There were no smartphones to distract or technologies to mask the labor behind each meal. People ate what was in season and preserved what they could for the winter months. The local grocery store offered basics, but the best produce came from backyard gardens or local farms. As the years passed, Earl saw the gradual shift as supermarkets began to carry exotic fruits and vegetables year-round. Convenience became a prized quality, and with it, a growing disconnect between people and the origins of their food. He wondered whether anyone in the city knew what it was like to wrestle with the soil, to feel the anticipation of a seed taking root, or the relief of a good yield. Those experiences shaped his character and the values he would later fight to preserve. The sense of community forged by farming was undeniable. During harvest season, the pace quickened. Everyone knew that timing was everything, and cooperation could make the difference between success and loss. Earl's father taught him that if you took care of the land, it would take care of you. That meant working tirelessly, respecting the seasons, and preparing for uncertainty. This adherence to tradition and readiness instilled a deep sense of faith. They believed that the rewards would come not just in the form of abundant crops, but also in the strength of character built through honest labor. Earl's mother reinforced the importance of family. Meals were eaten together, prayers were spoken over dinner, and stories were shared by candlelight. These moments cultivated a sense of purpose. Food was not only nourishment, but also a bond linking them to their heritage and each other. In this chapter, the narrative is not only about the history of one man's relationship with the land, but also about the collective memory of rural America. Fields turned golden by the autumn sun, barns filled with hay, and the sight of cows grazing peacefully evoke a time when people knew the source of their sustenance. Earl's memories are vivid and sensory, reminding us that food has a story. It comes from somewhere, created by someone. In the years to come, this understanding would erode as technology and urbanization transformed the landscape of agriculture. But in these formative years, before America forgot, the connection was tangible and sacred. To recall these roots is to appreciate the values of resilience and integrity that defined that era, and continue to echo in the heart of Earl Mitchell as he tends his land. Even before he was old enough to drive a tractor, Earl knew that working the farm would be his life's calling. There was a comfort in the rhythm of planting seeds in spring, tending them through summer, and reaping the harvest in fall. Winter was a time of rest for the land, but also of planning. Farmers gathered at local diners to discuss the season's challenges, share advice, and dream about the coming year. They relied on faith, family, and each other, weaving a fabric of support that would stand against droughts, floods, and economic downturns. This faith was not abstract. It manifested in daily rituals, from morning prayers in the barn to evening meals that nourished more than just the body. It was a faith born of necessity, a trust that if they did their part, the earth would yield enough to feed their families and communities. The honesty of the work left no room for pretense. One could not hide laziness in the face of a field that needed plowing or a crop that needed harvesting. Hard work was visible in calloused hands and tired backs, yet there was dignity in that fatigue. It meant they had contributed to something larger than themselves. In modern times, it is easy to overlook the sweat and sacrifice behind each bite of food. But in Earl's youth, the connection was clear. He learned that resilience is not only about surviving hard times, but also about facing them with grace and determination. This resilience would be tested repeatedly as the world around him evolved. When we remember these early days, we remember a time when America had not yet forgotten, when the distance between farm and table was measured in footsteps, not miles. As this chapter draws to a close, it is important to reflect on the way these foundational experiences shaped Earl's worldview. His father's teachings on caring for the land and honoring one's word became guiding principles. His mother's insistence on family meals instilled the value of togetherness. The community's reliance on one another fostered solidarity. To revisit these memories is to appreciate how deeply the land shaped not only the food they ate, but also the people they became. In the chapters to come, the narrative will follow Earl as he faces the pressures of modernization and urban encroachment, but it will always return to these roots. Before America forgot where food comes from, there was a profound understanding that sustenance was a partnership with the land, an agreement sealed by hard work and faith. Remembering this agreement is the first step in honoring the legacy of the last farmer and those who still hold the line in the field. As the years progressed, the landscape around Earl's farm began to change. The open fields and pastures that had once defined his world slowly gave way to new roads, subdivisions, and commercial developments. America was growing, and with growth came transformation. Highway expansions cut across farmland, making travel easier for city dwellers, but carving up fields that had been cultivated for generations. Earl watched as neighbors sold their land to developers, trading barns for strip malls. With each sale, the community that had once been bound by common purpose frayed a little more. The pace of life quickened, and the connection to the land weakened. Before America forgot where food comes from, these shifts were subtle, creeping up like vines on a fence until one day the view was unrecognizable. Earl felt the encroachment not only physically but emotionally. A sense of loss accompanied each bulldozer that rolled through. He remembered walking through rows of corn with his father, the plants towering above him like guardians. He could not imagine those rows being replaced by asphalt and parking lots. Yet in town, meetings and county boards, the promise of economic opportunity often trumped the voices of farmers. There were arguments about tax revenue and modern conveniences. People who had never turned a sod or tended a herd decided the fate of lands they did not understand. Earl spent evenings with his wife at the kitchen table, discussing whether to resist or adapt. Their children listened quietly, sensing the weight of those decisions. For Earl, selling was never an option. The land was family. It was history. It was a sacred trust passed down from his father and, he hoped, to his children. Around this time, technological advancements transformed farming practices. Tractors became larger and more efficient. Combines could harvest acres in a fraction of the time previously required. Fertilizers and pesticides promised higher yields. Earl adopted some of these innovations cautiously. He respected progress, but refused to let it replace the value of knowledge and care. He knew that chemicals could enhance growth, but also harm soil health if overused. He understood that efficiency could improve productivity, but also distance farmers from their fields. He refused to treat the land like a machine. Each decision was weighed against the long-term health of his farm. Some neighbors embraced technology wholeheartedly, increasing their output but becoming more reliant on costly equipment and debt. Earl maintained a balance, using tools to aid his work, but never allowing them to dictate his practices. The introduction of factory farming and industrialized agriculture reshaped the food system. Consolidation meant fewer family farms and more corporate-owned operations. Animals were confined in large barns instead of grazing in fields. Crops were produced on a scale unimaginable in Earl's father's time. Efficiency became the dominant metric. The narrative that bigger was better pervaded conversations, and small farms struggled to compete. Earl felt pressure from lenders and supply companies that wanted him to scale up or get out. He resisted, believing that farming was about more than output. It was about stewardship, sustainability, and community. He knew that a single farmer could not reverse national trends, but he also knew that surrendering would mean abandoning the values he held dear. His resilience was tested as he navigated new markets, fluctuating commodity prices, and increasing regulation. During these years, Earl's children grew into adults. Some left the farm, pursuing careers in other fields, while others returned after seeing the world. They brought new perspectives, bridging the gap between tradition and innovation. One son studied agricultural science and urged his father to consider crop rotation techniques that improved soil fertility without relying heavily on chemicals. A daughter who had worked in a city restaurant advocated for direct farm-to-table connections, linking their produce to local chefs who valued freshness and story. Earl listened. He recognized that adaptation was necessary to survive, but he insisted that any changes honor the land's integrity. Together, the family diversified. They introduced organic sections, experimented with heirloom crops, and reopened the old barn for community events. These innovations did not come easily, but they strengthened the farm's resilience. Each success affirmed their belief that sustainability and profitability were not mutually exclusive. As the cultural landscape shifted, so did the way people viewed farmers. In earlier decades, farmers were seen as essential stewards of the land, worthy of respect and gratitude. With urbanization and industrialization, that perception faded. Many consumers became disconnected from the origin of their food. The more food came in packages and the fewer people saw animals in fields, the easier it became to take food for granted. Earl noticed a changing attitude during farmers' markets. Some visitors marveled at the colorful array of produce but asked questions that revealed their ignorance. They did not recognize certain vegetables or understand the difference between pasture-raised and factory-farmed meat. It was not their fault. They had simply grown up in an environment where food appeared in supermarkets without context. Earl responded with patience, seeing it as an opportunity to educate and reconnect people to their food. He told stories about planting in spring, the smell of soil after rain, and the satisfaction of seeing seeds sprout. He spoke of the challenges of pests and droughts and the joys of harvest. Many listeners were moved, realizing how much they had overlooked. Through these conversations, the farm gained supporters who appreciated the value of local agriculture and were willing to pay a fair price for the quality and integrity they received. The farm's survival depended not only on production, but also on relationships. Earl understood that he needed allies beyond the borders of his property. He formed cooperative groups with other farmers to share resources and knowledge. They organized educational events, inviting school children to visit the farm and experience the sights, sounds, and smells of agriculture. Teachers thanked them for showing students that food does not come from a factory, but from fields that require care. Parents were grateful for the opportunity to reconnect with something real amidst a digital world. Earl found purpose in these interactions. They reaffirmed his mission to keep the memory of food's origins alive. In doing so, he strengthened his community and built a network of people committed to supporting local farms. Financial challenges were ever present. Commodity prices fluctuated, sometimes falling below the cost of production. Land taxes increased and regulations became more complex. Health insurance costs weighed heavily on family budgets. Earl met these challenges with determination and creativity. He diversified income streams by selling produce directly to consumers, hosting farm dinners, and partnering with local schools. He invested in sustainable practices that reduced costs over time, such as installing solar panels and using cover crops to improve soil health. He also advocated for policies that supported small farmers, speaking at town halls and writing to legislators. His voice, once confined to fields and barns, carried further as he joined broader efforts to protect the future of family farms. He was not alone. Across the country, farmers faced similar challenges and found strength in solidarity. Their collective resilience formed a quiet but powerful movement to preserve agriculture's heritage. The shifting landscape also brought personal trials. Earl and his wife experienced the loss of his father, whose wisdom and presence had been a guiding force. Navigating the business without that guidance was daunting, yet they honored his memory by applying the lessons he taught. Trust the land, stay faithful, and keep family close. Their children's departure to pursue different paths tested their vision of passing the farm through the generations. They confronted the possibility that the farm might one day lack a successor. It was a painful thought, one that many farmers face in a world where fewer young people choose agriculture. Earl encouraged his children to find their passions, knowing that a farm run by someone who does not love it cannot thrive. When one child returned with renewed purpose, it brought hope that the legacy would continue. This hope fueled their determination to adapt, persevere, and honor their roots despite the shifting landscape. By the end of this chapter, the reader has seen the complexity of maintaining a farm in the face of modernization and urban encroachment. The narrative underscores that resilience is not passive endurance, but an active choice to adapt while holding on to core values. Earl's story reveals the emotional toll of watching beloved fields transform into suburbs, but also highlights opportunities for renewal through innovation and education. The landscape may change, but the spirit of those who cultivate the land endures. Before America forgot where food comes from, farmers like Earl fought quietly against forces that threatened to sever that connection. Their stories remind us that the food on our tables originates in places that still exist, tended by people who refuse to be erased by time and progress. As the seasons continued to turn, Earl encountered trials that tested his resilience in ways he had never imagined. Nature can be both generous and unforgiving, and farming requires humility in the face of forces beyond human control. Droughts persisted longer than anyone predicted, leaving fields cracked and crops withering under relentless sun. When rainfall finally returned, it sometimes came as torrential storms, flooding low-lying areas and washing away topsoil. Each natural disaster delivered lessons about preparation, adaptation, and the limits of human control. Earl learned to read the clouds, track weather patterns, and invest in irrigation systems that could mitigate drought. He planted cover crops to protect the soil from erosion and diversified his plantings to reduce the risk of complete loss. Through these efforts, he demonstrated that stewardship of the land requires flexibility as well as tradition. The farm's challenges were not limited to the whims of weather. Industry posed new threats. Pollution from nearby factories drifted onto fields, coating leaves with soot and chemicals. Water sources became susceptible to contamination from industrial runoff. Earl spent evenings attending county meetings, advocating for regulations that would protect farmland from industrial waste. He joined other farmers in legal action when a corporation proposed to build a pipeline through a cluster of family farms. They understood the pipeline threatened not only the land, but also the water supply. These battles were exhausting and costly, but Earl's conviction never wavered. He believed that the land's integrity was worth fighting for. It was not just about his property, but about the wider community and future generations. The victories were hard-earned, and though some battles were lost, they left an enduring impact on local policy and awareness. The global economy introduced unpredictability into what had once been a more localized system. Commodity prices were influenced by factors far beyond local markets, international trade policies, currency fluctuations, and global events. Earl found himself competing not just with neighboring farms, but with growers thousands of miles away. He cultivated wheat only to see prices collapse because of a bumper crop in another country. He planted soybeans only to discover that a trade dispute had cut off a major market. This volatility challenged his ability to plan and threatened the financial stability of his farm. In response, Earl diversified his crops, reducing reliance on any single commodity. He explored direct-to-consumer sales channels and value-added products to shield himself from price swings. He also participated in cooperative marketing initiatives that provided greater bargaining power. These strategies required additional labor and adaptation, but they granted more control over income and improved resilience to global shocks. During this period, Earl suffered personal health setbacks. The physical toll of decades of farming had accumulated. Years of lifting bales, bending over crops, and working in extreme conditions resulted in back pain and joint issues. A fall from a ladder led to broken ribs and a long recovery. These injuries forced him to slow down and rely more on his children and hired hands. For someone who prided himself on his ability to handle any task, this dependence was humbling, yet it also offered an opportunity to reflect on the importance of community and succession planning. Earl had always hoped his children would continue the farm, but he had not realized how crucial their involvement would become until he could not carry the full burden alone. He relinquished tasks reluctantly, but found solace in watching his children step up. They brought energy, modern knowledge, and compassion, renewing his faith that the farm could endure beyond his years. These personal trials also deepened Earl's understanding of empathy and mentorship. He became more attentive to the struggles of younger farmers, recognizing how financial pressures and limited access to resources made it difficult to enter or sustain a farming career. He offered guidance, shared equipment, and provided encouragement. In doing so, he found purpose beyond his own fields. He remembered the support his father had received from neighbors and mirrored that generosity. His actions created a ripple effect as other experienced farmers joined the effort, forming informal networks of knowledge and assistance. Through these connections, they built resilience not only within individual farms, but also across the farming community. This solidarity highlighted an important truth. The strength of agriculture lies not just in productivity, but in the relationships that sustain those who cultivate the land. Despite their best efforts, some crises were unavoidable. Disease outbreaks among livestock demanded swift action. Earl recalled when a neighboring farm lost nearly its entire herd to an aggressive illness. The heartbreak in that farmer's eyes haunted him. It reminded him that farming is not just about crops and machines, but also about living creatures entrusted to human care. He implemented strict biosecurity measures, invested in veterinary consultations, and ensured his animals had clean, humane environments. He balanced efficiency with compassion, understanding that animals deserve dignity. These actions sometimes increased costs, but he saw them as non-negotiable. For Earl, farming was a moral endeavor as much as an economic one. He believed that how one treats animals reflects one's character and influences the quality of what reaches people's tables. In discussing these challenges with others, he emphasized that ethical farming is integral to resilience and community trust. Pandemics and global crises further revealed weaknesses in supply chains. When restaurants closed and demand patterns shifted, farmers struggled to adjust. Milk had to be dumped because processing plants were overwhelmed. Vegetables rotted in fields because distribution networks stalled. In these moments, many people for the first time noticed how fragile the food system is. Earl and his family had to adapt quickly. They redirected produce to local food banks, offered contactless pickup, and collaborated with other farmers to create delivery services. These adaptations required innovation and risk, but also fostered solidarity. The community recognized the value of local agriculture and responded with support. These experiences reinforced the notion that resilience is not just an individual trait, but a collective commitment. During all these trials, Earl's faith played a crucial role. Faith in a higher power, faith in the land's capacity to heal, and faith in his family's ability to navigate uncertainty gave him strength. Prayer was not a last resort, but a daily practice. It grounded him when storms threatened crops and when headlines announced global crises. This faith was intimately tied to gratitude. On days when yields were low or expenses high, he found reasons to be thankful. A calf born strong, a rainbow after the rain, a neighbor's kindness. Gratitude kept despair at bay and reminded him why he continued. It also reinforced the connection between stewardship and responsibility. He saw his work as a calling to care for creation, not simply a means of profit. This perspective set him apart from corporations that treated land as a commodity. He viewed it as a trust to be honored and protected. The trials of nature and industry taught Earl that resilience is not a static trait, but a dynamic process. It requires constant adaptation, learning, and reevaluation. It is built through small decisions as much as grand acts. Maintaining integrity in the face of temptation and holding on to values when corners could be cut are part of this process. He observed other farmers succumb to shortcuts that promised immediate gains but left them vulnerable. He refused to compromise on quality, sustainability, and ethics, even when profit margins were thin. These choices earned him respect and loyalty from customers who valued transparency and principle. They also inspired younger farmers to consider alternative paths, proving that success does not require sacrificing one's soul. The chapter closes with a reflection on the interconnectedness of trials and growth. Each hardship sharpened Earl's understanding of what truly matters: family, community, faith, and the land. Industrial pressures may come and go, weather may be unpredictable, and global markets may fluctuate, but the principles that guide sustainable farming remain constant. Before America forgot where food comes from, people weathered storms by standing together, relying on shared wisdom and mutual aid. Earl's story reminds us that these virtues remain our greatest assets. They allow us to endure when nature is harsh, when industry encroaches, and when unforeseen crises upend plans. The trials he faced did not break him. They refined him, reinforcing his dedication to preserving the heritage of the last farmer and ensuring that the memory of food's origins is not lost. Moving into the latter part of the 20th century, Earl witnessed the rise of an industrial appetite that transformed the American food landscape. Corporations expanded their influence, capitalizing on advances in transportation, refrigeration, and marketing. Supermarkets evolved into sprawling establishments with aisles stocked with products from around the world. Processed foods, ready meals, and flashy packaging promised convenience. Television commercials romanticized instant gratification. For many consumers, the lure of easy meals and low prices outweighed concerns about origin and quality. This shift was more than a change in diet. It signaled a cultural departure from the values of patience and craftsmanship. People spent less time cooking and more time working or consuming entertainment. The relationship with food became transactional. In this environment, the work of farmers like Earl was increasingly marginalized by corporate messaging that obscured the labor behind food production. Earl observed with dismay as industrial agriculture prioritized yields over soil health. Fields that had once been diversified and teeming with life were transformed into vast monocultures. These monocultures relied heavily on synthetic fertilizers and pesticides, creating temporary abundance at the cost of long-term sustainability. Companies invested heavily in genetically modified organisms designed to withstand herbicides and increase productivity. While these innovations offered certain benefits, they also threatened biodiversity and endangered smaller farms that could not afford expensive seeds or patented technologies. Corporate farms expanded aggressively, swallowing smaller operations and consolidating land under fewer owners. This concentration of ownership shifted power away from families and communities toward shareholders and executives who rarely set foot on a field. The industrial appetite also changed the way animals were raised. Factory farms, optimized for efficiency by confining thousands of pigs, cows, or chickens in cramped spaces. Economies of scale reduced costs but compromised animal welfare. The separation between consumers and livestock allowed unsightly practices to persist unseen. Earl believed firmly that animals deserve respect. He had always allowed his cattle to graze freely, believing that healthy animals produce healthier food. He could not understand how practices that disregarded the well-being of animals gained acceptance. In conversations with neighbors and at community meetings, he voiced his concerns about factory farming. Some dismissed him as old-fashioned, yet others listened and began to question the ethics of their food choices. Earl did not condemn innovation, but insisted that progress should not come at the expense of humanity's moral compass. Environmental consequences of the industrial appetite became impossible to ignore. Intensive farming practices contributed to soil erosion, water, pollution, and greenhouse gas emissions. Rivers and lakes near farming regions suffered from chemical runoff, causing algal blooms that devastated aquatic life. The climate changed. Weather patterns grew more unpredictable. Earl read scientific studies linking industrial agriculture to climate change and saw the effects firsthand. He experienced hotter summers and more severe storms. He recognized that while family farms could adopt sustainable practices, large-scale change required systemic overhaul. He joined efforts to promote regenerative agriculture, which emphasizes soil health, biodiversity, and carbon sequestration. Through workshops, he learned about rotating livestock, integrating crops and animals, and restoring prairie grasses. He shared these practices with his children and neighboring farmers, demonstrating that stewardship of the land benefits both productivity and the planet. As the industrial appetite grew, Earl also noticed a shift in culture. Food, once celebrated as a communal and cultural experience, became a commodity. People ate quickly, alone, often while multitasking. The ritual of shared meals diminished. Families rarely gathered around the table, and when they did, the food was often purchased, not prepared. The sense of gratitude that accompanied meals prepared from scratch faded. People forgot to savor flavors or appreciate the work that went into producing their food. Earl refused to let these traditions die within his household. He insisted that meals be eaten together, even when work schedules were demanding. These moments anchored them. They shared stories, discussed challenges, and offered support. The table became a sanctuary where they remembered the purpose behind their toil. One day, a teacher from a nearby city brought a busload of students to the farm. These students had grown up believing that hamburgers came from fast food chains and lettuce from plastic-wrapped packages. Earl welcomed them warmly and took them on a tour. He showed them fields of corn and soybeans, explained how soil is prepared, how seeds are planted, and how crops are harvested. He walked them through the barn, demonstrating how to feed animals and what a healthy cow looks like. He let them smell freshly cut hay and touch the warm flank of a gentle horse. The students' eyes widened as they absorbed these new experiences. They were surprised by how much work went into a single ear of corn or a gallon of milk. Teachers thanked Earl for offering a real-world lesson that no classroom could provide. This encounter reinforced his belief that first-hand experience is a powerful antidote to ignorance. Influenced by corporate advertising and busy lifestyles, many adults were also disconnected from the origin of their food. Earl organized farm dinners where families could enjoy meals prepared with ingredients grown on site. These dinners featured long tables set between rows of crops, candles flickering as the sun set over the fields. Chefs collaborated with farmers to design menus that highlighted seasonal produce and traditional recipes. Guests lingered over multiple courses, savoring flavors and stories. Earl or his children would stand and speak about the journey from seed to plate, the challenges of farming, and the importance of preserving farmland. These dinners sold out quickly, indicating a hunger not just for fresh food, but for connection. Attendees left with a deeper appreciation for farmers and an understanding of the richness that comes from slowing down and reconnecting with the source of sustenance. The rise of the industrial appetite also sparked a counter-movement advocating for real food. Farmers, markets, community-supported agriculture programs, and organic certifications gained popularity. Earl saw this as an opportunity. He joined local farmers' markets and established a subscription service where families could receive weekly boxes of fresh produce directly from his farm. He experimented with heirloom varieties and heritage breeds that offered unique flavors. He attended workshops on marketing and branding, learning to tell the story of his farm in ways that resonated with modern consumers. This combination of authenticity, quality, and innovation drew supporters who were tired of the anonymous food system. It also attracted the attention of local media, which featured his farm in articles and broadcasts. This exposure expanded his customer base and underscored that there was a growing appetite for something other than convenience. As the industrial appetite continued to shape America's food landscape, Earl remained a steadfast advocate for the land and its caretakers. He spoke at conferences, wrote letters to editors, and even visited high schools to share his perspective. He knew he was one voice among many, but he also knew that each voice matters. By telling his story and embodying values of integrity and perseverance, he hoped to inspire change. He encouraged his children to embrace new technologies thoughtfully, to engage in policy discussions, and to continue educating the public. Through these actions, he planted seeds not just in the soil, but in minds and hearts. Seeds of curiosity, accountability, and appreciation for those who feed the nation. Before America forgot where food comes from, farmers like Earl were cultural anchors. In the face of the industrial appetite, they became guardians of an endangered connection. The 21st century ushered in an era where forgetting seemed almost inevitable. Screens replaced physical landscapes, and people spent hours each day immersed in virtual worlds. Food delivery apps allowed meals to arrive with a few taps, and grocery services delivered produce without the customer ever setting foot in a store. While convenience expanded, awareness of food's origins shrank. Children drew pictures of farms from memory and often depicted animals standing beneath palm trees because their idea of agriculture came from cartoon shows rather than reality. Many urban residents never visited a farm. They never saw the sweat on a farmer's brow or the satisfaction on a child's face as she pulled a carrot from the earth. This forgetting was not intentional. It was a byproduct of modern life, yet it carried consequences. Without awareness, appreciation wanes. Without appreciation, support dwindles. And without support, small farms struggle. Earl noticed this forgetting in subtle ways. When he visited a grocery store, he saw parents reading labels not for origin but for calorie counts or marketing slogans. He heard conversations about diets and superfoods devoid of context. He watched as people passed over perfectly ripe peaches in favor of plastic-wrapped strawberries shipped from far away. He read articles that framed farmers as outdated relics rather than essential contributors to the economy and environment. These small observations signaled a broader cultural shift. People were losing the sensory memory of a tomato warmed by the sun, the sound of leaves rustling in a field, and the satisfaction of shelling peas on a porch. This loss of sensory connection to food eroded understanding of why farms matter and why it is worth preserving them. At the same time, a yearning quietly emerged. Amid the disconnect, people began to sense that something vital was missing. They craved authenticity, nature, and meaningful experiences. Social media influencers posted about weekend getaways to vineyards and rural inns. Urban dwellers sought community gardens to grow herbs and vegetables. People started fermenting sauerkraut and baking bread at home, discovering the joy of watching dough rise. Farmers' markets proliferated in cities, offering direct access to local produce. Documentaries about the dangers of processed foods and the benefits of sustainable farming gained popularity. Books telling the stories of rural life resonated with readers. This yearning was not just nostalgia. It was a hunger for connection in a fragmented world. Earl saw this yearning as an opportunity to bridge the gap between forgetting and remembering. He opened his farm to more visitors, hosting seasonal events that aligned with planting, harvesting, and preservation. Spring brought planting days where families could sow seeds and learn about soil health. Summer featured berry picking and lessons on irrigation and pest control. Autumn was celebrated with harvest, festivals where people could press apples into cider, carve pumpkins, and help harvest late crops. Winter offered workshops on canning, preserving, and planning for the next planting season. At each event, Earl or his children spoke about the significance of the season, the history of farming, and the value of sustainable practices. They answered questions, dispelled myths, and encouraged participants to share their newfound knowledge with others. The farm's social media presence expanded as well. Earl's daughter, who had studied communications, created videos that showcased daily life on the farm. She filmed the sunrise over dew-covered fields, captured the rhythmic sound of seeds being sown, and interviewed her father about his earliest farming memories. These videos reached audiences far beyond their local area. Comments poured in from viewers who had never seen a tractor up close or had never considered the journey a vegetable makes from seed to plate. Many viewers thanked the family for sharing their world and expressed a desire to learn more. Some asked practical questions about gardening. Others shared stories of their grandparents' farms. Through these online connections, the farm became a source of education and inspiration. It demonstrated that even as forgetting spreads, technology can be harnessed to nurture remembering. Food education programs in schools grew in response to the yearning for reconnection. Inspired by Earl's farm visits, teachers integrated lessons on agriculture into their curriculum. Children learned about pollination, soil science, and the impact of pesticides on ecosystems. They planted seeds in classroom gardens and charted their growth. They tasted different types of apples and compared flavors. They visited local farms and saw animals being cared for. These experiences left lasting impressions. Students who once thought milk came from cartons now understood the process of milking a cow. They developed respect for the work involved and gratitude for the nourishment they received. Earl volunteered to be a guest speaker at several schools. He explained concepts such as crop rotation, conservation, and the importance of local food systems. The children's enthusiasm gave him hope. He realized that the seeds of appreciation and knowledge he planted in young minds could grow into a culture that values farming. The yearning for connection also influenced popular culture. Television shows celebrated cooking from scratch and highlighted chefs who sourced ingredients locally. Books about slowing down and savoring meals became bestsellers. Social media movements encouraged people to share images of meals made with produce from farmers' markets. Communities organized potluck dinners where neighbors brought dishes reflecting their heritage and using local ingredients. Through these trends, the conversation around food shifted. It began to include questions about origin, sustainability, and impact. People started reading labels for more than just nutritional information. They wanted to know where their food came from and how it was produced. This curiosity opened doors for farmers like Earl to engage with wider audiences. It allowed them to share their values and invite people to participate in the journey of food. However, the yearning did not automatically translate into widespread change. Obstacles remained. Large corporations continued to dominate the market, offering convenience and low prices that were hard to resist. For some families, especially those with limited income, cheap processed foods were the only affordable option. Access to fresh, local food was often restricted by location or socioeconomic status. Earl recognized these realities and did not judge those who chose or had to rely on industrial food. Instead, he advocated for policies that made fresh produce more accessible and affordable. He supported community gardens in urban neighborhoods, offered discounts to families with limited resources, and partnered with food banks to donate surplus produce. He believed that everyone deserves good food, regardless of income. Ensuring equitable access is essential to addressing the broader issue of forgetting. He also recognized that yearning could become performative. Some people posted pictures of vegetables on social media, but never visited a farm. They owned mason jars for pickling, but never learned to can. They displayed heirloom seeds on their counters without planting them. Earl did not begrudge them their interest, but encouraged them to go deeper. He invited them to experience the work and knowledge that lie beneath the surface. He reminded them that real connection requires engagement and effort. It requires getting one's hands dirty, literally and figuratively. In doing so, he safeguarded against superficial trends, turning into little more than aesthetic choices. He strived to ensure that the yearning led to meaningful relationships with food and farmers rather than fleeting moments of curiosity. This chapter emphasizes the dual themes of forgetting and yearning. The forgetting is a slow drift away from tangible experiences and knowledge. It arises from technology, convenience, and urbanization. The yearning is a subtle pull toward authenticity and connection. It emerges from a sense of emptiness and the desire to reconnect with something meaningful. Earl's actions demonstrate how farmers can respond to these trends. By opening their farms, engaging with community, leveraging technology for education, and advocating for equitable access, they can transform yearning into awareness. And by doing so, they help ensure that the memory of where food comes from endures despite the forces encouraging forgetfulness. Approaching his late 60s, Earl Mitchell became increasingly aware of the fragility of the heritage he represented. Many of his peers had sold their farms or retired without successors. The average age of farmers in America was rising, and young people were not replacing them at the rate needed to sustain the profession. The question of who would continue the work weighed heavily on his mind. He had spent 50 years cultivating his land, preserving traditions, and adapting to change. He had taught his children the value of resilience and integrity, But would there be someone to continue the legacy when he could no longer walk the rows or mend the fences? This realization ignited a renewed sense of purpose. He did not see himself as simply finishing his career. He saw himself as standing for something larger than himself. In the face of forgetting, industrialization, and cultural shifts, Earl resolved to become a voice for the last farmers. He began to speak more publicly about the importance of preserving farmland, supporting local agriculture, and respecting the people who feed the nation. He wrote opinion pieces for newspapers, appeared on local radio shows, and participated in panel discussions. His story resonated with listeners because it was authentic and deeply rooted in values. He emphasized that his efforts were not about nostalgia, but about safeguarding the future. At the farm, he focused on training the next generation. One of his sons, inspired by the combination of tradition and innovation, decided to return full-time. Together, they reviewed every aspect of the operation. They modernized equipment where it aligned with sustainable practices and maintained older methods where technology offered no advantage. They introduced new crops with higher resilience to climate fluctuations and experimented with permaculture principles. They collaborated with local chefs to cultivate varieties that were more flavorful, but less common in supermarkets. Each decision was guided by a commitment to the land and the community it served. Earl shared stories with his son about how his father had made similar decisions decades earlier. He explained the thought process behind crop rotations, the timing of planting, and the importance of watching animals closely. These discussions bridged generations, blending wisdom with innovation. Earl also mentored young farmers outside his family. He offered internships and apprenticeships to students interested in agriculture. These programs provided hands-on experience and insight into the realities of farming. Participants learned about machinery, soil management, business planning, and customer relations. They also learned about resilience, the necessity of patience, and the importance of community. Some apprentices went on to start their own farms. Others worked in food policy or education. All left with a deeper appreciation for the agricultural heritage they had encountered. By investing in these individuals, Earl helped ensure that the knowledge and values of the last farmer would not die with him. The farm became a rallying point for advocacy campaigns. Earl and his family hosted events where community members, local officials, and policymakers could discuss issues affecting small farms. They highlighted the consequences of unchecked development, the need for farmland preservation programs, and the benefits of local food systems. They invited farmers to share their experiences and organized group letters to legislators. At one event, a county commissioner admitted that he had never considered the long-term impact of rezoning farmland for commercial use. He left with a new perspective and later supported policies that protected agricultural land. These advocacy efforts were not always successful, but they created dialogue, shifted perspectives, and built alliances. They also underscored the power of storytelling in influencing policy. Earl's personal narrative made abstract concepts concrete and urged people to act. The last farmers' stand extended beyond local borders. Earl was invited to conferences and gatherings across the country. He met farmers from different states and backgrounds, discovering shared challenges and unique solutions. At one conference, he listened to a farmer from California discuss water scarcity and learned techniques for more efficient irrigation. At another, a rancher from Texas shared insights about regenerative grazing. Each encounter broadened his understanding and enriched his practice. He returned home with new ideas and connections. These experiences also reinforced his conviction that the fight to preserve farmland and honor farmers transcended geography. It was a national concern, one that required solidarity across regions and sectors. Earl's stand was not without personal sacrifice. The work demanded time and energy that could have been spent with family or tending his own fields. It required travel, public speaking, and navigating bureaucratic processes. It exposed him to criticism from those who viewed him as an obstacle to progress. Some developers labeled him stubborn or anti-growth. Some politicians dismissed his concerns as sentimental. There were days when he felt discouraged, when progress seemed slow and opposition strong. Yet he drew strength from his faith and his heritage. He remembered his father's stories, the farmers who had supported him, and the children's eyes when they visited the farm. He recognized that every conversation, every article, every letter had the potential to influence someone's perception. He kept going because he believed that the stakes, preserving the connection between land and food, were worth every challenge. One particularly powerful moment occurred when a group of farmers near Earls County faced eminent domain claims for a proposed highway expansion. The route would cut through several family farms, including one owned by a young couple with toddlers. Earl organized community meetings, brought in legal counsel, and mobilized support. He spoke passionately at a county commission hearing, sharing statistics about farmland loss and personal anecdotes about his father's sacrifices. The young couple spoke about their dreams and the heritage they hoped to pass to their children. Together, they persuaded the commission to consider alternate routes. The highway project was eventually modified to avoid the most critical agricultural land. It was not a total victory, but it prevented irrevocable damage to the farming community. This experience showed Earl that standing up for others amplified his voice and led to meaningful outcomes. As part of his stand, Earl also embraced storytelling through art. He collaborated with local artists and musicians to create installations and performances that celebrated rural life. One art exhibit featured photographs and sketches of barns, fields, and farmers' hands. Another event included a concert where musicians played songs about harvests, resilience, and tradition. These cultural expressions resonated with people beyond the farming community. They humanized issues that could otherwise seem abstract. They also offered moments of joy and celebration amid advocacy work. By weaving art into his stand, Earl highlighted that farming is not only an economic activity, but also a cultural and emotional one. This chapter portrays Earl's emergence as the last farmer's advocate. It underscores that standing for something meaningful often involves stepping into roles you never envisioned. It demonstrates how personal stories can influence policies and how mentorship can plant seeds of change. Earl's stand is a testament to the power of resilience and integrity. It is a reminder that one person's commitment can inspire others, shape communities, and help preserve a way of life. Before America forgot where food comes from, farmers like Earl were seen as essential. In a world where forgetting is prevalent, their stand is vital. It keeps the memory alive and encourages renewed appreciation. Despite the challenges of modernity, the seeds of renewal were taking root across the nation. Communities were rediscovering the value of local food systems and the joy of gardening. Urban farms sprouted in vacant lots, on rooftops, and in community spaces. School gardens provided hands-on learning and fresh produce for cafeterias. City dwellers joined community-supported agriculture programs, receiving boxes of seasonal fruits and vegetables each week. Restaurants proudly listed the names of farms on their menus, and chefs championed heritage ingredients. These efforts signaled a shift from passive consumption to active participation. They indicated that the yearning described earlier was beginning to bear fruit. Earl watched these developments with cautious optimism. He saw that people were starting to ask deeper questions about their food. They wanted to know not just what they were eating, but also how it was grown and who grew it. They were concerned about carbon footprints, animal welfare, and fair labor practices. They were excited by the diversity of flavors offered by heirloom varieties and artisanal methods. This renewed interest encouraged Earl to continue sharing his knowledge. He partnered with urban farmers to offer training in soil health and crop rotation. He collaborated with community gardeners to exchange seeds and stories. He hosted workshops on composting, permaculture, and seed saving. Each interaction enriched both sides, bridging the gap between rural and urban, past and present. In his own community, Earl and other farmers established a cooperative that emphasized sustainability and education. They created a shared space where farmers could sell their products directly to consumers, teach classes, and host events. They offered mentoring programs for aspiring growers and scholarships for students pursuing agricultural studies. The cooperative also served as a hub for information about grant programs, technical assistance, and policies, initiatives. It fostered collaboration instead of competition, recognizing that collective success strengthens each individual farm. The cooperative's success inspired other regions to replicate the model, creating a network of similar hubs across the state. Another seed of renewal was the rise of regenerative agriculture. Unlike conventional approaches that focus on short-term yields, regenerative practices aim to restore and enhance ecosystems. They include techniques such as cover cropping, no-till farming, integrating livestock, and diversifying plantings. These methods improve soil health, increase water retention, and sequester carbon. Earl attended trainings on regenerative agriculture and implemented many of these techniques. He planted cover crops during the off-season to protect soil and add nutrients. He experimented with rotational grazing, moving animals across pastures to mimic natural grazing patterns. He diversified his fields with a mix of crops that supported each other's growth. These changes required careful planning and sometimes produced smaller yields in the short term. However, they increased the land's resilience and productivity over time. Earl saw it as an investment in the future, aligning with his commitment to stewardship. Farmers' markets evolved as part of the renewal. They became community centers rather than mere transactional spaces. Musicians played guitars or fiddles under tents while families chatted with farmers. Children tasted samples of fruits and vegetables they had never tried. Nutritionists gave tips on healthy recipes, and cooking demonstrations showed how to prepare seasonal produce. Local artisans sold crafts and baked goods, turning the markets into celebrations of community creativity. These markets provided economic opportunities for farmers and enriched the social fabric. They also offered a direct answer to forgetting. People could see the faces of those who grew their food, ask questions, and express gratitude. Earl loved standing behind his stall, answering inquiries about soil, weather, and flavor profiles. He valued the conversations as much as the sales. Renewal also took the form of policy changes. Some states passed laws to protect farmland from development, offer tax incentives for conservation practices, and support beginning farmers. These policies resulted from years of advocacy by farmers, environmentalists, and concerned citizens. They acknowledged the importance of preserving agricultural land for future generations. Earl testified before committees, recounting his own experiences and emphasizing the broader implications of farmland loss. He celebrated when his state adopted a farmland preservation program, which allowed farmers to sell conservation easements in exchange for financial compensation. This program provided stability and assurance that the land would remain dedicated to agriculture. It also illustrated how individual stories can influence collective action. Technology played a complex role in renewal. On one hand, it contributed to forgetting by enabling easy access to processed foods and distracting entertainment. On the other hand, it empowered farmers to connect with consumers, share knowledge, and operate more efficiently. Social media allowed farmers to showcase their work, educate audiences, and build communities. Smartphone apps helped consumers locate farmers' markets and track the seasonality of produce. Online tools assisted farmers in monitoring soil moisture, tracking weather patterns, and managing finances. Earl embraced technology selectively. He posted updates about the farm and responded to questions from followers. He used software to improve crop planning and reduce waste. He installed sensors in his greenhouse to maintain optimal conditions, yet he continued to emphasize personal relationships, reminding his children that technology should complement, not replace, human connection. Education remained critical in the renewal process. Universities expanded agricultural programs to include sustainable and regenerative practices. Extension services offered workshops on soil health, water conservation, and direct marketing. Community colleges added courses on beekeeping, mushroom cultivation, and small-scale farming. Earl collaborated with educators to design curricula that integrated practical experience. He invited students to spend time on the farm and required them to engage with every aspect of the operation. They left with calloused hands, full minds, and hearts stirred by the beauty and complexity of farming. Some returned to start their own ventures. Others became advocates in fields like environmental science, nutrition, or policy. Each carried forward the knowledge and appreciation they gained. The seeds of renewal were also spiritual. Many people found solace and healing in reconnecting with the earth. Gardening became a form of meditation. Watching seeds germinate and grow fostered patience and hope. Working in soil connected people to something larger than themselves. Earl recognized this aspect when visitors described feeling peaceful on his land. He saw how children playing in the field forgot their screens and immersed themselves in exploration. These spiritual experiences reinforced the importance of preserving green spaces and offering opportunities for people to interact with nature. They reminded him that his work was not only about producing food, but also about nurturing souls. Despite the positive signs, renewal faced obstacles. Land prices continued to rise, making it difficult for new farmers to purchase property. Corporate consolidation persisted, and global markets remained volatile. Climate change accelerated, bringing more extreme weather events. These challenges could discourage even the most dedicated farmer. Yet renewal thrived precisely because it was rooted in community and faith. Farmers shared resources, diversified their income streams, and advocated for supportive policies. They placed hope in their ability to adapt and in the increasing awareness among consumers. Earl remained vigilant but hopeful. He saw renewal as a promise, not a guarantee. It required continual cultivation, like any crop. The dynamic interplay between forgetting, yearning, and renewal culminates in a broader theme of reconnection and responsibility. As more people rediscover the value of knowing where their food comes from, they face choices about how to act on that awareness. Reconnection is not only about personal enjoyment or nostalgia. It carries responsibilities toward the land, the people who farm it, and the systems that sustain us. Earl understood this deeply. His life exemplified a constant balancing act between enjoying the bounty of the earth and tending to its needs. Now, as more people joined the movement to reconnect, he reflected on what responsibility should accompany their awakening. First, there is the responsibility to respect the land. This goes beyond avoiding litter or preserving scenic views. It means understanding the delicate balance of ecosystems, the importance of soil health, and the impact of chemicals. It involves supporting farming practices that regenerate rather than degrade. It requires advocating for policies that protect farmland from being paved over. Reconnection should inspire action to ensure that the land remains fertile and available for future generations. Earl encouraged those he met to think of themselves as stewards, whether they owned acres or a single potted plant. He taught them that stewardship is a mindset informed by gratitude and foresight. Second, there is the responsibility to respect and fairly compensate the people who grow our food. Farming is labor-intensive and financially risky. Farmers often work long hours for slim margins. They face unpredictable weather, market fluctuations, and rising costs. Yet their work is essential to our survival. Reconnection calls us to honor their efforts by paying fair prices, advocating for better labor conditions, and supporting policies that protect small farms. It also invites us to humanize farmers, seeing them not as faceless suppliers, but as individuals with stories, families, and dreams. Earl's storytelling underscores this point. By sharing his experiences, he bridges the gap between producer and consumer, making it easier for people to understand and support him. Third, reconnection brings a responsibility to educate future generations. Knowledge can be easily lost if not passed on. The values that Earl's father imparted to him and that he imparted to his children need to be transmitted intentionally. This includes practical skills like gardening, cooking, and preserving, as well as attitudes of gratitude, patience, and perseverance. It also requires critical thinking about food marketing, nutrition, and environmental impacts. When children learn that food does not magically appear in stores, they develop respect for the process and the people involved. Education ensures that reconnection is not a fleeting trend, but a lasting cultural shift. Fourth, reconnection entails responsibility to participate in civic processes. Many aspects of the food system are shaped by policies related to land use, subsidies, trade, and environmental regulations. Being an informed voter and advocate is crucial. Earl became more politically active as he aged, recognizing that his voice and vote could influence decisions affecting agriculture. He encouraged his children and apprentices to attend town hall meetings, understand local zoning ordinances, and engage with representatives. He stressed that civic engagement is not separate from farming. It directly impacts the viability of farms and the quality of food available. Reconnection also invites responsibility to build community. Food has always been a social connector. When people gather to plant, harvest, cook, and eat together, they form bonds that strengthen resilience. Potlucks, community gardens, and farm-to-table dinners are more than enjoyable events. They are acts of solidarity. They provide spaces for conversation, learning, and mutual support. They help break down barriers between rural and urban, old and young, different cultural backgrounds. Earl observed how community building around food created trust and cooperation that extended beyond the meal. People who farmed together were more likely to support each other during hardships. Residents who knew their farmers were more willing to defend farmland. Through community, reconnection grows from individual interest into collective action. Finally, reconnection calls us to reflect on our own consumption habits. It invites us to slow down and savor, to choose foods that align with our values, and to minimize waste. It challenges the convenience-driven culture that perpetuates forgetfulness. Earl and his family practiced mindful eating long before it became a trend. They used leftovers creatively, preserved surplus, and composted scraps. They adjusted their diet according to what the land produced, rather than forcing the land to meet constant demand. They treated meals as occasions for gratitude and reflection. In sharing these practices, they modeled a responsibility that anyone can adopt, regardless of where they live. Reconnection and responsibility are inseparable. The former is the awakening, the latter is the action. Without responsibility, reconnection risks becoming mere sentimentality. With it, reconnection becomes transformative. Earl's life demonstrates how deeply these values can shape an individual and a community. By sharing his story, he invites others to join him in embracing responsibility as joy rather than burden. The reward is a healthier, more equitable, and more resilient food system. It is also the preservation of cultural memory and the satisfaction of knowing that we honor those who feed us. Earl understood that his time working the land was limited. Aging brought wisdom, but also physical constraints. He could no longer repair fences as quickly as he once could, or lift heavy bales without assistance. At the same time, his experience became more valuable. He had decades of knowledge to share, and now it was time to pass the torch. This chapter explores how legacy is cultivated and transferred. It also confronts the realities of succession in farming, acknowledging that not every farm finds an heir, and not every heir chooses the farm. One of Earl's sons, David, had returned to the farm full-time. David brought with him a background in environmental science and a passion for regenerative practices. Together, father and son sat at the kitchen table with maps, yield records, and financial statements spread out before them. They discussed the farm's strengths and vulnerabilities. They reviewed potential crops that could thrive under climate projections and considered diversified enterprises such as agritourism. These planning sessions were intense but collaborative. Earl listened to David's proposals, sometimes skeptical but always respectful. David valued his father's intuition and historical knowledge. The combination of data and experience led to a robust plan for the farm's future. Earl prepared legal documents to ensure the transition would be smooth. He worked with attorneys to draft wills and trusts that protected the farm from fragmentation. He consulted with financial advisors to structure the transfer in a way that avoided burdensome taxes. He invited David and his siblings to provide input, respecting their perspectives. These conversations were not easy. Emotions ran high. Some siblings worried about fairness, others worried about responsibility. Earl navigated these discussions with honesty, reminding everyone of their father's and grandfather's intentions. The goal was not just to protect assets, but to preserve a way of life. Through openness and clear communication, they reached agreements that everyone could accept. While planning for the future, Earl continued to mentor David in daily operations. He taught him how to judge the readiness of hay by feel and smell, how to listen to the soil and know when it needed rest, and how to read animals' behavior to detect illness. These lessons went beyond manuals and spreadsheets. They were about intuition, observation, and relationship. Earl believed that effective farming is as much about heart as it is about science. David absorbed these lessons gratefully, aware that he was receiving a gift of knowledge that could not be found in textbooks. Together, they walked the fields, discussing the past and envisioning the future. Earl also encouraged David to build his own networks. He introduced him to other farmers, invited him to conferences, and urged him to join advocacy groups. He wanted David to have support beyond the family. Farming can be lonely, and external connections provide perspective and resources. David embraced these opportunities, building relationships with peers who shared his commitment to sustainability. He collaborated with them on marketing initiatives and grant applications. He also mentored younger farmers, passing on what he learned from his father and his own experiences. This cycle of mentorship created a chain of knowledge and support that stretched beyond the farm's boundaries. Meanwhile, other children of farmers faced decisions about succession. Some chose to return to the land. Others pursued careers in fields like medicine, technology, or education. Each path was valid. Earl respected those who chose different directions. He understood that forcing someone to farm without passion would lead to resentment and potential failure. However, he encouraged those who left to remain connected. They could support the farm in other ways, through advocacy, financial investment, or occasional labor during busy seasons. He believed that legacy is not confined to ownership, but includes an ongoing relationship with the land and the family's heritage. This inclusive view allowed his children to honor their roots while pursuing their own dreams. For farms without heirs, succession can be heartbreaking. Generational farms may be sold to strangers or developers. The memory of family stewardship can be erased in a single transaction. Earl was determined to prevent that fate for his farm, but he also empathized with those who faced different circumstances. He participated in programs that connected retiring farmers with young people interested in agriculture. These arrangements, often called farm transitions or farm linking, allowed experienced farmers to pass on their operations to newcomers. Earl hosted workshops on succession planning, inviting experts to speak and farmers to share experiences. These workshops covered legal structures, financial planning, and family dynamics. They emphasized that planning should start early and involve all stakeholders. By raising awareness, Earl hoped to reduce the number of farms lost because of poor planning or lack of heirs. As David gradually took on more responsibility, Earl stepped back from daily operations. He spent more time in the farmhouse office, reviewing records, writing, and reflecting. He wrote letters to his grandchildren, sharing stories of how their great-grandfather bought the farm and the lessons he learned growing up. He compiled journals of weather patterns, crop yields, and management decisions. These writings served as a historical record and a guide for future generations. He also wrote essays for local newspapers and farm newsletters, urging readers to value their food sources. Writing became a new form of stewardship. Through words, he tended to memories and values, ensuring they would be accessible even when he could no longer stand in the fields. The day came when David officially took over management. It was a sunny morning in late spring. Earl gathered the family around the kitchen table. He expressed gratitude for the support he had received and confidence in David's leadership. He handed his son a worn ledger with a history of the farm's finances and the keys to the equipment shed. Though symbolic, these gestures carried weight. They represented trust, continuity, and responsibility. David accepted them with humility and determination. He promised to honor the land, uphold the family's values, and continue the farm's legacy. There were tears, laughter, and a sense of peace. The torch was passed, not as a heavy burden, but as a beacon guiding the future. Passing the torch did not mean Earl's work was done. He remained a mentor, advisor, and storyteller. He enjoyed a new role that allowed him to witness his life's work continue in capable hands. He also found time to pursue hobbies and interests that had long been set aside. He fished in the pond behind the barn, built birdhouses with his grandchildren, and read books about history and theology. He took walks through the fields not to work them, but to appreciate them. Each step reminded him of his father and the life they had built. He felt satisfaction knowing that his efforts contributed to something enduring. This chapter underscores that legacy is an active process. It requires planning, communication, and the willingness to let go. It honors past generations while empowering the next. It acknowledges that not all transitions are neat or easy, but emphasizes that they are necessary for continuity. Passing the torch ensures that the memory of where food comes from does not end with one person's life. It keeps alive the practices, values, and stories that define a farm. Earl's experience offers guidance to others facing similar transitions. It invites families to engage in open dialogue, seek professional advice, and nurture relationships. Through these actions, they can transform the inevitable passage of time into a moment of renewal. In the final chapter, we return to the idea of harvest, not just as the culmination of a growing season, but as the metaphor for a life's work and a nation's collective memory. Harvest is a time of gathering, celebration, and reflection. It is the moment when the fruits of labor are enjoyed and stored, ensuring sustenance through the winter. For Earl, the harvest now represented not only corn, wheat, and vegetables, but also stories, experiences, and lessons. As he and David brought in the last crops of the season, Earl walked through the fields one evening, taking in the colors of sunset reflecting off golden grain. He felt gratitude for the bounty before him and for the people who helped achieve it. He thought about his father, who had stood in the same spot decades earlier, and about his own grandchildren, who would one day stand there too. Harvest of memory begins with acknowledging the effort behind what we receive. Every meal is the culmination of countless actions. Seeds planted, soil tilled, rain welcomed or endured, pests managed, and harvests gathered. When people forget, they risk losing the appreciation and gratitude that come with this understanding. When they remember, they foster a culture of respect and humility. Earl's life served as a beacon illuminating this truth. His daily routines, his public advocacy, and his family gatherings all reinforce the message that food is not a commodity disconnected from its source. It is life, sustained by people and nature working in harmony. In broader society, the harvest of memory involves reclaiming stories of land and people. It means listening to farmers, indigenous communities, immigrant laborers, and food artisans whose histories are often overlooked. It involves recognizing that food cultures are diverse and rich, shaped by climate, geography, and tradition. Harvest of memory calls for inclusion, acknowledging contributions from all who cultivate, cook, and share food. This inclusive memory counters the homogenization of industrial food systems. It celebrates variety and honors the hands that make variety possible. Earl contributed to this inclusive memory by inviting diverse groups to his farm, learning from others, and sharing his own experiences. His openness to exchange enriched his understanding and expanded the narrative beyond his own perspective. Preserving memory also means preserving places. Farms, gardens, and green spaces are physical archives of experience. When they are paved over, memories fade and stories lose context. Farmland preservation programs protect these places for future generations. Community gardens in cities serve as living reminders of humanity's agricultural roots. By supporting preservation, people ensure that the harvest of memory remains tangible. Earl's advocacy for land conservation stemmed from this understanding. He knew that memory is anchored in soil. Without access to the land, people rely solely on imagination or second-hand accounts. With it, they can touch, smell, and see the history they inherit. Harvest is also about generosity. Farmers harvest not only for themselves, but for their communities. They share their bounty at markets, food banks, and family tables. They take pride in feeding others. This generosity is reciprocal. Communities support farmers by purchasing their products, volunteering, and advocating for them. During harvest festivals on Earl's farm, neighbors gathered to celebrate and share. They thanked the farmers, tasted dishes prepared from the farm's produce, and danced to music under the stars. These celebrations reinforced social bonds and created positive associations with agriculture. They made the work visible and valued. In a society where many jobs are hidden behind screens or offices, farm work offers a tangible, communal expression of contribution. The harvest of memory invites everyone to participate. You do not need to own land or farm for a living to contribute. You can plant a herb garden on your windowsill, volunteer at a community garden, or support a local farmer. You can cook a meal from scratch, invite friends or family, and share stories about where the ingredients came from. You can teach children to appreciate the effort behind their food. You can advocate for farmland preservation and support policies that protect our food sources. In doing so, you partake in the harvest of memory. You help gather the stories and practices that might otherwise be lost. You contribute to a collective memory that honors the past and informs the future. As Earl and David stored the last of the grain, the sun dipped below the horizon. They stood together in the quiet twilight, feeling the coolness of the evening air. For a moment, there was no need for words. The rustle of dry leaves, the distant lowing of cattle, and the gentle creaking of the barn were music. Earl closed his eyes and breathed deeply. He felt the weight of decades of work and the lightness of knowing that the torch had been passed. He thought of the seasons he had endured, droughts, floods, bountiful harvests, and lean years. Each had left an imprint on the land and on his character. Each had contributed to the harvest of memory that he now offered to future generations. His story, like the stories of countless farmers, is one thread in the tapestry of America's agricultural heritage. Together, they weave a rich narrative of resilience, integrity, faith, and perseverance. When we remember this narrative, we resist the forces that encourage us to forget. We honor the dignity of honest labor and the beauty of the land. We ensure that the last farmer is not a myth, but a living legacy. The harvest of memory asks us to slow down, pay attention, and express gratitude. It invites us to see food not as a commodity, but as a gift, accompanied by stories and love. It challenges us to protect the sources of that gift, land, water, farmers, and to make choices that sustain them. As this story ends, take a moment to remember a meal that holds meaning for you and appreciate the hands and land behind it. Let this remembrance guide your choices and conversations so that the link between food and those who produce it remains strong. Thank you for taking this journey through the life of Earl Mitchell and the landscape of American farming. If this story resonates, join our community by subscribing and sharing your own experiences of resilience, integrity, and the unbreakable spirit of those who work the land. Your continued support ensures these traditions endure, nurturing communities and protecting the farms that sustain our collective heritage forever.